Princess Michael of Kent was born Baroness Marie Christine Anna Agnes Hedwig Ida von Reibnitz on January 15, 1945, in Karlovy Vary, then part of Nazi-occupied Czechoslovakia. She is known today as a member of the British royal family through her marriage to Prince Michael of Kent, a first cousin of Queen Elizabeth II. But before she became Princess Michael of Kent, before she symbolized a continental link between British royalty and Central European aristocracy, she was the daughter of a German nobleman. Wartime record would later become public through archival investigation. In the mid-1980s, British newspapers revealed that her father had been a member of the Schutzstaffel, the SS. That disclosure reshaped public understanding of her background and permanently linked her biography to the documented structures of the Third Reich. Before we begin, please comment where in the world you are watching from. I would like to know how far this history is reaching. Princess Michael of Kent was born Baroness Marie Christine Anna Agnes Hedwig Ida von Reibnitz on January 15, 1945, in Karlovy Vary, a spa town then located within the borders of Nazi Germany, following the annexation of the Sudetenland in 1938. Her birth occurred during the final months of the Second World War, at a time when German military defeat was imminent. She entered the world as the daughter of Baron Günther Hubertus von Reibnitz and Countess Maria Anna Carolina Franziska Walburga Bernadette von Schapari. Both parents belonged to established aristocratic families whose histories were rooted in the political and military structures of Central Europe. The von Reibnitz family traced its lineage to Silesian nobility, with documented service in imperial administrations dating back to the 19th century. Members of the family had held military and civil appointments under the Austro-Hungarian Empire and later within German state institutions. This background reflected a pattern common among Central European aristocratic houses, where land ownership, officer commissions, and dynastic marriages reinforced social standing. The Schapari family, on her mother's side, was one of Hungary's historic magnate families, with connections to imperial governance and diplomatic service. These networks positioned Marie Christine within a transnational aristocratic culture that predated the upheavals of the 20th century. By the time of her birth in 1945, those long-standing structures were under severe strain. The collapse of Nazi Germany in May of that year led to rapid territorial and political realignment across Central Europe. The Sudetenland was restored to Czechoslovak control, and large populations of ethnic Germans were expelled under post-war decrees. Aristocratic status offered little protection in this environment. Property confiscations and forced relocations affected numerous noble families, including those with centuries of regional presence. The von Reibnitz family, identified as ethnically German, became part of this broader displacement. Her father's wartime affiliations would later become central to public discussion. Archival records confirm that Baron Günther von Reibnitz joined the National Socialist German Workers' Party and was enrolled as a member of the SS during the 1930 period. At the time of his daughter's birth, he had already served within the institutional framework of the Third Reich. However, in the immediate post-war years, attention focused less on public accountability in exile communities and more on survival and resettlement. Allied denazification processes categorized former party members within occupied Germany, but many families rebuilt their lives elsewhere in Europe. Marie Christine's early childhood unfolded against this background of political restructuring. Her parents divorced during her youth, and her mother later remarried. The family's movements reflected both personal change and broader post-war migration patterns. Although the aristocratic title of Baroness remained part of her identity, the social order that had once sustained such titles had been fundamentally altered. The authority of hereditary rank no longer carried the same legal or economic weight in Central Europe after 1945. These circumstances shaped the foundation of her life before her eventual marriage into the British royal family decades later. She was born into an established noble lineage at the precise moment when that lineage's political environment was collapsing. The convergence of aristocratic heritage and wartime history defined the starting point of her biography. This early context established the framework within which later revelations about her father's documented affiliations would be understood. Baron Günther Hubertus von Reibnitz reached adulthood during the political instability that followed the First World War and the dissolution of the German and Austro-Hungarian empires. Born in 1909 into a Silesian aristocratic family, he was educated within a social environment that valued military service and state loyalty. By the early 1930 period, Germany was undergoing rapid political transformation under Adolf Hitler and the National Socialist German Workers' Party. Like many men of aristocratic background seeking continuity of status within the new order, von Reibnitz entered institutions aligned with the regime. Archival documentation preserved in the German Federal Archives confirms that he became a member of the Nazi Party during the 1930 period. His enrollment was formal and recorded through party administrative channels. The same records establish that he was accepted into the Schutzstaffel, commonly known as the SS. The SS had been founded in the 1920 period as a protective unit for party leadership and expanded significantly after Hitler's appointment as Chancellor in 1933. By the mid-1930 period, it had developed into a central organ of security, intelligence, and ideological enforcement. Membership in the SS required application, background review, and racial and political vetting, consistent with the organization's criteria. Von Reibnitz's acceptance placed him within a structure that reported directly to Heinrich Himmler. Personnel files from the period list identification numbers and administrative assignments, indicating that his affiliation was neither symbolic nor honorary. This was documented through official rosters rather than retrospective claims. The existence of such records would later form the evidentiary basis for journalistic inquiry. During the 1930 period, Germany underwent rearmament and consolidation of authoritarian control. The SS expanded into multiple branches, including the Allgemeine SS and later the Waffen-SS. While detailed operational records of von Reibnitz's specific duties are limited in public reporting, archival confirmation of membership situates him within the broader institutional apparatus of the Third Reich. Aristocratic lineage was often viewed favorably within certain SS recruitment circles, as notions of heritage and lineage aligned with ideological constructs promoted by the regime. By the time Marie Christine was born in January 1945, Germany was experiencing military collapse on multiple fronts. Allied forces were advancing from both west and east, and administrative continuity within the Nazi state was deteriorating. Von Reibnitz's documented affiliations therefore belonged to a regime in its final months. In May 1945, Germany formally surrendered, and the Allied occupation authorities initiated denazification procedures designed to categorize former party and SS members according to levels of responsibility. Denazification tribunals reviewed documentation, personal statements, and supporting records to determine classification. Many individuals with documented party membership underwent assessment during the late 1940 period. These processes generated files that were later preserved within federal repositories. The retention of these materials ensured that membership details remained accessible to researchers decades later. This continuity of record-keeping would prove significant in the 1980 period when journalists examined the backgrounds of individuals connected to prominent public figures. The documented affiliation of Günther von Reibnitz did not attract international attention during the immediate post-war decades. Instead, it remained within administrative archives in Germany. However, the existence of formal records created a permanent historical trace. That trace would later intersect with his daughter's public life after her marriage into the British royal family. The cause and effect relationship between archival preservation and later disclosure was direct. Without preserved documentation, the issue might have remained obscure. With it, verification became possible, and the historical record remained intact for future examination. In May 1945, Germany's unconditional surrender marked the formal end of the Third Reich and initiated a period of occupation, territorial revision, and administrative restructuring across Central Europe. For families identified as ethnic Germans in territories restored to Czechoslovakia, and Poland. The immediate consequences included expulsion under post-war decrees. The Sudetenland, where Marie Christine had been born earlier that year, was reintegrated into Czechoslovakia. Under the Beneš decrees, property belonging to many ethnic German residents was confiscated, and large numbers were forced to relocate westward into occupied Germany and Austria. The von Reibnitz family fell within this category of displacement. Aristocratic status offered no exemption from the broader policy framework. Estates, residences, and movable assets were subject to state seizure. As with many noble families whose identity had been tied to regional landholdings for generations, this transition represented a structural break. The loss of property reduced economic security and altered social position. These developments were not unique to one household, but formed part of a wider demographic transformation, affecting millions across the region. In the immediate post-war years, Allied authorities implemented denazification procedures within occupied Germany. Former members of the Nazi Party and affiliated organizations, including the SS, were required to complete questionnaires and undergo classification. Categories ranged from major offenders to nominal followers. These determinations influenced employment eligibility and civil participation. Records generated through this process were archived within federal repositories. Baron Günther von Reibnitz's documented party and SS membership therefore entered formal review structures, creating administrative files that remained preserved. During this period, Marie Christine was an infant, and her personal experience of displacement was mediated through family decisions. Her parents' marriage did not remain stable in the post-war environment. They divorced while she was still young, reflecting both personal strain and the broader pressures faced by displaced families rebuilding their lives. Her mother later remarried, which introduced further relocation and reorganization of household circumstances. Such shifts were common among aristocratic families, attempting to reestablish stability after 1945. The broader European context also shaped her early environment. The late 1940 period and early 1950 period were characterized by economic hardship, reconstruction initiatives such as the Marshall Plan, and the emergence of new political alignments. West Germany began integrating into Western institutions, while Central European states behind the emerging Iron Curtain experienced different administrative systems. For displaced German families, resettlement often meant adapting to new national frameworks. These structural transformations affected education, language use, Sprachenspeichenship, and social integration. Marie Christine's upbringing unfolded within this environment of transition. While she retained the hereditary title of Baroness by birth, the practical significance of aristocratic rank had diminished in many parts of Europe. Titles no longer guaranteed property or political authority. Instead, social capital increasingly depended on personal networks, education, and adaptation to new national settings. The continuity of noble identity persisted culturally, but its institutional basis had been reduced. By the early 1950 period, the immediate turbulence of expulsion had given way to longer-term adjustment. The administrative documentation generated through denazification and territorial redistribution remained in official archives. These records, created as part of bureaucratic necessity, would later provide the evidentiary foundation for historical reassessment. For the von Reibnitz family, the post-war years established a new baseline defined by displacement, altered status, and integration into reshaped European societies. This reorganization of family circumstances formed the next stage in Marie Christine's development before her eventual entry into British royal life decades later. By the early 1950s, Marie Christine von Reibnitz was growing up in a Europe that had largely stabilized after the immediate disruptions of the war. Her parents' divorce altered the structure of her household, and her mother's subsequent remarriage led to further geographic movement. During her youth, she spent a period of time in Australia, where her mother had relocated. This relocation reflected a broader pattern among European families seeking opportunity and distance from the political legacies of the war. The move introduced her to an English-speaking environment and to educational institutions outside continental Europe. Her schooling included convent education, consistent with her family's Roman Catholic background. Catholic institutions provided continuity at a time when national borders and political systems had shifted. Religious education also connected her to transnational networks that extended beyond Central Europe. These educational experiences contributed to linguistic fluency and social adaptability, qualities that would later prove significant in her public life. At this stage, her identity was defined primarily by aristocratic lineage, rather than by public scrutiny of her father's wartime record. In the late 1950s and early 1960s, she returned to Europe. The continent was undergoing economic expansion, driven by post-war reconstruction and increasing integration among Western European states. Aristocratic families, though diminished in formal authority, continued to maintain social networks through private gatherings, diplomatic events, and cultural institutions. Marie-Christine entered this milieu as a young woman connected to German and Hungarian noble houses. Her background positioned her within circles that valued heritage and lineage, even as Europe modernized rapidly. Throughout the 1960s, she became active in social and cultural life in London and other European capitals. Her presence in these environments reflected the enduring visibility of continental aristocracy within diplomatic and elite social settings. She developed interests in interior decoration and historical research, areas that aligned with aristocratic traditions of estate management and genealogical study. At this time, public media coverage of her life was limited. She was not yet associated with the British royal family, and her father's documented National Socialist affiliation remained confined to archival records in Germany. The broader political environment of the 1960s also shaped perceptions of the wartime past. West Germany was engaged in a gradual process of confronting National Socialist history through legal proceedings and historical scholarship. However, international attention to individual cases often depended on direct political prominence. As a private citizen, Marie-Christine was not the subject of investigative reporting. Her social activities were reported in lifestyle columns rather than in historical analysis. By the early 1970s, she had established herself within European high society. Her multilingual background and aristocratic heritage facilitated access to international circles. These developments occurred without substantial public examination of her family's wartime history. The separation between private archival documentation and public identity remained intact. This separation would continue until her marriage brought her into a more visible constitutional context. The educational foundation, continental mobility, and social positioning of her early adulthood created the conditions for her later introduction to British royal life. The trajectory from displaced aristocratic child to internationally connected adult unfolded over 2 decades. During this period, her biography was shaped more by transnational upbringing than by political controversy. That balance would change only after her marriage to Prince Michael of Kent, when increased media scrutiny created new pathways for historical inquiry. On June 30, 1978, Marie-Christine von Reibnitz married Prince Michael of Kent in a civil ceremony held at the Rathaus in Vienna, Austria. The choice of Vienna reflected her Central European background and maintained continuity with her family's historical ties to the region. Prince Michael, born in 1942, was the younger son of Prince George, Duke of Kent, and Princess Marina of Greece and Denmark. As a first cousin of Queen Elizabeth II, he occupied a position within the extended British royal family, though not among its senior working members. The marriage therefore connected a Central European aristocrat to the British monarchy through dynastic relationship rather than through direct succession. Prior to the wedding, Marie-Christine converted from Roman Catholicism to Anglicanism. At the time, the Act of Settlement restricted the succession rights of those who married Roman Catholics. Prince Michael, who had been included in the line of succession at birth, would have forfeited his place had she remained Catholic. Her conversion allowed him to retain his constitutional status under the law as it stood in 1978. The legal framework surrounding the marriage attracted media attention and underscored the continuing intersection between personal decisions and constitutional requirements within the monarchy. Following the ceremony in Vienna, a religious blessing took place in London. Upon marriage, she assumed the style and title of Her Royal Highness Princess Michael of Kent. Unlike women who marry heirs apparent and receive territorial designations, she took her husband's name as her title, in keeping with British royal convention. This form reflected her position within the extended rather than the immediate line of succession. The structure of titles within the royal family is governed by letters patent and established precedent, and her designation followed those established rules. The marriage integrated her into public life in the United Kingdom. Although Prince Michael was not a full-time working royal, funded through the civil list, he carried out engagements on behalf of the crown, particularly in connection with Commonwealth countries and foreign relations. Princess Michael participated in selected charitable activities and public appearances. Media coverage during the late 1970s and early 1980s often focused on her European lineage, language skills, and interest in historical subjects. Her aristocratic background was presented as a cosmopolitan addition to the royal circle. At the time of the marriage, there was limited public discussion in the British press regarding her father's wartime affiliations. Archival documentation confirming Baron Günther von Reibnitz's Nazi Party and SS membership existed in German repositories, but it had not entered mainstream British reporting. Attention instead centered on issues of religion, protocol, and social integration. The constitutional implications of her conversion were examined in detail, while deeper investigation into her family history did not yet occur. The marriage also positioned her within a more visible media environment. Membership in the royal family, even in a non-senior capacity, subjected individuals to ongoing journalistic scrutiny. Public interest in royal biographies often extended to ancestry and lineage. This structural shift in visibility created conditions in which archival research into her family background would later gain relevance. Increased access to European records during the 1980s would intersect with this heightened attention. By the close of the 1970s, Princess Michael of Kent had transitioned from continental aristocrat to recognized member of the British royal family. Her status was defined by marriage, title, and participation in selected public duties. The constitutional and social dimensions of this transition were clearly documented. At this stage, her father's documented wartime affiliations remained outside British public discourse. The combination of elevated profile and preserved archival records, however, would later converge in a manner that reshaped public understanding of her background. By the early 1980s, Princess Michael of Kent had established a defined position within the extended structure of the British royal family. Unlike senior working royals supported directly through parliamentary funding, Prince and Princess Michael derived income primarily through private means and commercial activities. Nevertheless, they undertook a number of official and semi-official engagements, particularly those involving Commonwealth associations and charitable organizations. This arrangement placed them within public view while also requiring a degree of financial independence not demanded of more senior members of the monarchy. Princess Michael became involved in cultural and heritage-related initiatives during this period. She supported organizations connected to historical preservation and patronized selected charities. Her fluency in several European languages contributed to her participation in international engagements. Media profiles frequently highlighted her continental upbringing and aristocratic lineage. Articles in British newspapers during the early 1980s described her as cosmopolitan and well-connected within European noble circles. The focus remained on her social identity and royal association, rather than on detailed examination of her family's wartime past. At the same time, the British press was undergoing structural changes. Competition among tabloids intensified, and investigative reporting into the private backgrounds of public figures became more common. The monarchy, long a subject of sustained interest, experienced increased scrutiny during this decade. Marriages, finances, and personal histories of royal relatives were examined with greater frequency. This broader media environment created conditions in which previously obscure archival information could acquire renewed relevance. Within West Germany, historical scholarship concerning National Socialist institutions continued to expand during the early 1980s. Federal archives maintained personnel files documenting party and SS membership. Researchers and journalists gained improved access to these records as cataloging systems became more standardized. The preservation of such documentation ensured that individual affiliations remained traceable. While many former members had passed away by this period, their recorded enrollment details persisted within institutional collections. Princess Michael's father, Baron Günther von Reibnitz, had died in 1983. His death preceded the public reporting that would emerge 2 years later. At the time of his passing, his documented affiliation with the Nazi Party and the SS had not been widely discussed in the British media. The information remained within German archival holdings and had not intersected directly with her public role. The temporal proximity between his death and the subsequent disclosure would later shape interpretations of the episode. During these years, Princess Michael also began to publish historical works and to cultivate an image associated with research into European dynasties. Her interest in genealogy and aristocratic history aligned with her background. Public lectures and writing projects reinforced this intellectual dimension of her profile. The contrast between her engagement with historical subjects and the archival record of her father's wartime affiliation would later draw attention once the documentation became widely known. By mid-decade, the convergence of heightened media scrutiny in Britain and accessible archival records in Germany created a pathway for investigative reporting. The structural factors were in place. A royal family member with continental ancestry, preserved federal files detailing party membership, and a press environment increasingly attentive to historical accountability. These developments set the stage for the publication that would follow in 1985. The groundwork for that revelation was administrative and institutional rather than personal. It arose from preserved documentation, evolving research access, and sustained media interest in royal biographies. In 1985, British tabloid newspapers published archival findings concerning Baron Günther Hubertus von Reibnitz, identifying him as a documented member of both the National Socialist German Workers' Party and the Schutzstaffel, known as the SS. The reports were based on material obtained from German federal archives, where personnel files from the Third Reich had been preserved following the war. Journalists cited party enrollment records and SS registration details, presenting them as verified administrative entries rather than anecdotal claims. The publication marked the first time that these archival documents had been widely reported in connection with Princess Michael of Kent. The investigation emerged within a broader context of increasing scrutiny of public figures' family histories. During the 1980s, British tabloids invested significant resources into examining backgrounds, particularly those connected to the royal family. The availability of catalogued German records facilitated cross-border research. In this instance, reporters consulted federal repositories that maintained centralized documentation of party and SS membership. The files listed von Reibnitz's name, date of birth, and formal affiliation details. This was not based on rumor. It relied on preserved bureaucratic evidence. According to contemporary reporting, Princess Michael became aware of the full archival documentation through press inquiry. While her father's wartime service had been a matter of record within Germany, it had not previously been highlighted in British coverage of her life. The disclosure therefore introduced new factual material into public discourse. Newspapers emphasized the nature of the SS as an organization central to the enforcement mechanisms of the Nazi state. Background articles outlined the expansion of the SS during the 1930s under Heinrich Himmler and its institutional role within the regime. Public reaction in the United Kingdom reflected the enduring sensitivity associated with Nazi affiliations. The Second World War remained a defining historical reference point in British national memory. Confirmation that the father of a royal family member had held SS membership attracted immediate attention. At the same time, coverage consistently noted that Princess Michael had been born in January 1945, months before Germany's surrender in May of that year. The chronological separation between her birth and her father's documented affiliation became a central element of reporting. Buckingham Palace did not issue an extensive formal statement. The absence of a detailed institutional response underscored that the matter concerned historical documentation rather than contemporary conduct. There were no legal proceedings associated with the disclosure, and no suggestion that Princess Michael herself had any involvement in wartime activities. Media analysis focused on the implications of inherited biography within a modern constitutional monarchy. The distinction between personal responsibility and familial association was repeatedly emphasized. Historians consulted by newspapers confirmed that SS membership required formal application and approval. Personnel files typically included identification numbers and administrative data. The presence of von Reibnitz's name within these records established that his affiliation had been officially recognized during the period of National Socialist governance. These confirmations reduced ambiguity and shifted discussion toward historical context rather than evidentiary dispute. The 1985 investigation altered public understanding of Princess Michael's family background. It demonstrated how archival preservation could intersect with contemporary biography decades after the original events. The disclosure did not modify her constitutional status, but it permanently linked public profile to documented structures of the Third Reich. The episode also illustrated the expanding role of archival research in late 20th century journalism. From this point forward, her father's verified affiliation remained part of the historical record, accompanying her name in biographical accounts. Following the publication of the 1985 tabloid reports, attention shifted from initial disclosure to documentary verification. Journalists and historians sought confirmation directly from German federal repositories responsible for maintaining personnel files from the National Socialist period. The Bundesarchiv, which held centralized records of party and SS membership, became the primary reference point. Requests for file confirmation were processed through established archival procedures. The resulting responses affirmed that Baron Günther Hubertus von Reibnitz had been formally enrolled in the Nazi Party and registered as a member of the SS. The documentation included standard administrative data. Party enrollment forms recorded identifying details such as date of birth, place of origin, and membership number. SS files contained parallel registration information consistent with internal record-keeping practices of the organization. These entries were part of a broader bureaucratic system that cataloged millions of individuals affiliated with National Socialist institutions. The presence of von Reibnitz's name within this framework was therefore consistent with preserved archival structure. This was not conjecture. It was based on institutional documentation. Historians familiar with the SS clarified the distinction between various branches of the organization. The Allgemeine SS functioned as a general administrative body, while the Waffen-SS operated as an armed combat formation. Public reporting in Britain during 1985 focused primarily on the existence of membership rather than on detailed operational assignments. Archival confirmation established affiliation but did not provide comprehensive public detail regarding day-to-day duties. The emphasis remained on verified enrollment within the institutional hierarchy of the Third Reich. German archival authorities also confirmed that such records had survived the destruction of many wartime files because they were incorporated into post-war administrative processes. During the denazification period after 1945, Allied authorities collected and reviewed documentation related to party and SS members. Files were consolidated, microfilmed, and eventually transferred to federal custody. This chain of preservation ensured continuity of evidence. The survival of von Reibnitz's membership records followed this established pattern. British media coverage evolved as verification became public. Initial headlines gave way to more measured reporting that cited archival confirmation and expert commentary. The shift in tone reflected the transition from revelation to substantiated fact. Newspapers published clarifications regarding rank, enrollment dates, and procedural requirements for SS membership. Where early reports contained imprecise details, subsequent articles corrected them in light of official archival responses. The process demonstrated the self-correcting function of documentary journalism. Within the royal household, there was no extensive formal response beyond acknowledgement of the factual basis of the reports. The matter was framed as historical rather than contemporary. Princess Michael's birth in January 1945 and her lack of personal involvement were reiterated. The distinction between individual agency and inherited background remained central to public discussion. No constitutional implications arose from the confirmation of her father's affiliation. The archival verification phase stabilized the narrative. The facts were established through federal records, and the scope of the affiliation was defined by documented enrollment rather than speculation. The episode underscored the enduring relevance of preserved administrative files in shaping modern biographical understanding. It also illustrated how the institutional mechanisms of the Nazi state, once recorded for internal governance, continued to influence reputations decades later. With verification complete, the focus shifted toward broader historical context and the role of aristocratic families within National Socialist Germany. Once archival verification confirmed Baron Günther von Reibnitz's Nazi Party and SS membership, public discussion in the United Kingdom entered a more structured phase. The initial shock associated with tabloid exposure gave way to analysis grounded in confirmed documentation. Newspapers and broadcast outlets revisited the factual record, emphasizing dates of enrollment, organizational structure, and the distinction between membership categories. Commentary increasingly focused on historical context rather than allegation. This shift reflected the stabilization of the evidentiary base. Buckingham Palace adopted a restrained approach. There was no prolonged public statement or formal inquiry, as the matter concerned historical records predating Princess Michael's birth. The absence of a constitutional issue limited institutional response. At the time, Prince Michael of Kent did not hold a central governmental role, and Princess Michael's activities were primarily charitable and cultural. The palace's position was consistent with established practice in matters involving extended family members and historical family background. Media commentary repeatedly noted that Princess Michael had been born in January 1945, several months before Germany's surrender in May of that year. This chronological fact became central to framing the issue. Her personal biography began at the end of the war, not during the period in which her father's documented affiliations occurred. Journalists underscored this separation to clarify responsibility. The distinction between inherited association and individual participation shaped public interpretation. At the same time, historians were consulted to contextualize aristocratic involvement in National Socialist institutions. During the 1930s, segments of the German aristocracy aligned with or cooperated with the regime for varied reasons. Some sought to preserve social influence. Others were motivated by ideological alignment or career advancement within military and administrative structures. The SS, in particular, valued notions of lineage and heritage consistent with its racial doctrine. Von Reibnitz's documented membership therefore fit within broader patterns identified by scholarship. Public reaction in Britain reflected both historical sensitivity and measured assessment. The Second World War remained a defining reference point in national identity, and SS affiliation carried symbolic weight. Yet commentary also acknowledged that archival disclosure decades after the events did not alter present legal standing. There were no calls for constitutional sanction, nor were there formal parliamentary proceedings related to the matter. The discussion remained within the realm of historical accountability and reputational impact. Princess Michael continued to undertake public engagements during this period. Coverage of her activities frequently included reference to the confirmed archival findings, but these mentions were typically contextual rather than central. Over time, the episode became a standard biographical note rather than a dominant news story. The integration of the information into public record marked a transition from revelation to accepted fact. The institutional and public response demonstrated the mechanisms by which modern democracies process historical disclosures. Documentation was verified, context was provided, and distinctions were drawn between personal and familial responsibility. The situation did not escalate into legal or constitutional crisis. Instead, it became part of the broader narrative surrounding European aristocracy and its entanglement with 20th century political systems. With immediate reaction subsiding, scholarly and journalistic attention increasingly shifted toward comparative analysis of aristocratic affiliations during the National Socialist era. Following the confirmation of Baron Günther von Reibnitz's Nazi Party and SS membership, historians and commentators situated his affiliation within the broader relationship between the German aristocracy and the National Socialist regime. During the 1930 period, segments of the traditional elite engaged with the emerging state for a range of reasons that included ideological alignment, institutional continuity, and professional advancement. The collapse of the Weimar Republic and the consolidation of power by Adolf Hitler in 1933 altered the political environment in which aristocratic families operated. Many faced decisions regarding accommodation, resistance, or withdrawal. The SS, under Heinrich Himmler's leadership, developed recruitment standards that emphasized ancestry and perceived racial suitability. In this context, individuals from established noble lineages could be viewed as aligning with the organization's ideological framework. Membership did not require aristocratic status, but lineage was sometimes regarded as compatible with its criteria. Archival research conducted during the late 20th century demonstrated that numerous aristocrats joined either the Nazi Party, the SS, or related institutions during the 1930 period. Von Reibnitz's documented enrollment therefore reflected a pattern that scholars had already identified in broader studies. At the same time, the aristocracy was not politically uniform. Historical evidence shows that certain noble families participated in resistance efforts, including plots against Hitler during the later years of the war. Others maintained distance from party structures, while some became integrated into administrative or military hierarchies of the regime. The diversity of responses underscores that aristocratic status alone did not determine political alignment. Von Reibnitz's recorded membership must therefore be understood within this varied landscape rather than as an isolated anomaly. Academic research expanded significantly during the 1980s and 1990s, as improved archival access allowed historians to examine personnel files in greater detail. The consolidation of records in the German Federal Archives provided structured data sets for analyzing patterns of party and SS enrollment. These studies documented the social composition of membership, including occupational background, regional distribution, and educational attainment. Findings indicated that members came from multiple social strata, with aristocrats representing a measurable but minority segment of overall enrollment. Public discussion in Britain increasingly incorporated these scholarly perspectives. Commentary moved beyond the specifics of one individual case to consider the structural relationship between elite families and authoritarian governance. The existence of preserved documentation allowed for evidence-based analysis rather than conjecture. This shift in focus broadened the narrative from biographical detail to institutional context. It also reinforced the principle that historical evaluation requires examination of systems as well as individuals. For Princess Michael of Kent, this contextualization did not alter the established facts of her father's affiliation. Instead, it positioned those facts within a wider framework of European history. The clarification reduced the tendency to treat the matter as singular and instead connected it to documented patterns across German society during the 1930 period. The historical record remained grounded in archival confirmation, while scholarly analysis provided structural interpretation. By the early 1990 period, the immediate controversy surrounding the 1985 disclosure had largely subsided. The confirmed membership remained part of her biographical profile, but discussion increasingly emphasized historical context and generational distinction. The integration of individual documentation into broader scholarship marked a maturation of the narrative. This development allowed the episode to be understood not only as a media revelation, but also as a case study in the enduring influence of preserved administrative records on contemporary biography. By the late 1980s, the initial intensity of coverage surrounding Baron Günther von Reibnitz's documented SS membership had diminished, but references to it did not disappear. Instead, the information became incorporated into standard biographical summaries of Princess Michael of Kent. Whenever profiles were published in newspapers or magazines, particularly those examining her background or personal views, mention of her father's wartime affiliation frequently appeared as contextual detail. The transition from headline revelation to recurring reference marked a shift in how the episode functioned within public discourse. The British media landscape during this period was highly competitive. Tabloid journalism coexisted with broadsheet reporting, and both formats maintained ongoing interest in the royal family. Princess Michael, known for her outspoken manner and interest in European history, occasionally attracted attention independent of her father's record. When such attention arose, journalists often revisited established archival facts. The repetition did not introduce new documentation. It reiterated verified membership information drawn from German federal archives. Throughout the late 1980s and into the 1990s, Princess Michael continued public engagements and charitable associations. She remained involved in heritage organizations and pursued writing projects centered on royal and aristocratic history. These activities reinforced her public image as someone engaged with historical scholarship. The presence of confirmed archival material concerning her father created an additional layer of scrutiny whenever she addressed European political history or dynastic matters. The intersection of personal heritage and professional interest occasionally prompted renewed commentary. The broader European context also evolved during this period. The fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 and the subsequent reunification of Germany in 1990 altered access to historical records and intensified scholarly examination of the National Socialist era. Archival consolidation and digitization initiatives expanded research capacity. Although von Reibnitz's membership had already been confirmed, the growing academic infrastructure underscored the permanence of documented evidence. The historical record was no longer dependent solely on physical files. It became part of searchable archival systems. Public debate in Britain during the 1990s increasingly distinguished between inherited background and individual accountability. Legal frameworks addressing war crimes were directed at those directly implicated in prosecutable offenses. No proceedings were associated with Princess Michael in relation to her father's documented affiliation. Media commentary reflected this legal distinction. Reports emphasized chronology and generational separation while acknowledging the symbolic significance attached to SS membership. Within the royal institution, the matter did not alter her formal standing. Prince and Princess Michael of Kent continued to undertake limited official duties without constitutional disruption. The monarchy's approach remained consistent with earlier restraint. Historical disclosure was acknowledged as fact, but it did not prompt structural change. This continuity reflected established principles governing extended family members whose activities fall outside central governance functions. By the close of the 20th century, the episode had settled into a defined place within Princess Michael's public biography. It was neither concealed nor amplified beyond documented scope. The durability of archival records ensured that the information remained accessible to journalists and scholars alike. The combination of preserved documentation, evolving media practices, and ongoing royal visibility sustained awareness of the affiliation without generating new developments. The narrative had stabilized, shaped by verification, repetition, and historical context rather than by ongoing discovery. As the 1990s progressed, reporting on Baron Günther von Reibnitz's National Socialist affiliation became more precise. Early tabloid accounts from 1985 had focused on the headline fact of SS membership. In subsequent years, journalists and historians revisited the archival material to clarify specific details regarding rank, dates of enrollment, and administrative status. The German Federal Archives continued to serve as the authoritative source. Requests for confirmation followed formal research procedures, and responses were based on preserved personnel files rather than secondary accounts. These clarifications addressed ambiguities that had appeared in initial coverage. In some instances, newspapers had used generalized language to describe SS involvement without distinguishing between branches or levels of responsibility. Later reporting differentiated between structural membership and operational command. Archival files established enrollment and identification numbers, but did not publicly document high-level leadership positions. This distinction reduced speculation and aligned public understanding more closely with available evidence. The correction of imprecise phrasing demonstrated the role of documentation in refining narrative accuracy. During this period, German scholarship on the administrative composition of the SS expanded significantly. Researchers analyzed demographic data derived from membership rosters, examining age distribution, educational background, and social origin. Such studies provided statistical context for individual cases. Von Reibnitz's affiliation was understood within this broader framework of institutional enrollment, rather than as an isolated anomaly. The emphasis on structural analysis reinforced the principle that historical interpretation requires comparative data. In Britain, biographical works referencing Princess Michael increasingly incorporated these clarified details. Authors cited federal archival confirmation and avoided speculative assertions. Where early reports had emphasized symbolic impact, later accounts concentrated on documentary fact. The narrative shifted from revelation to established record. This evolution reflected broader changes in journalistic standards, particularly concerning historical allegations involving public figures. Verification became central, and attribution to archival sources was routine. Princess Michael's own public activities continued during this time, including authorship of historical publications and participation in cultural events. Her engagement with European royal history occasionally drew renewed attention to her background. However, no new archival discoveries altered the confirmed record of her father's membership. The factual parameters remained stable. Public discussion centered on interpretation rather than on additional evidence. The preservation of denazification files also contributed to historical clarity. Post-war administrative reviews had cataloged former party and SS members according to established criteria. These classifications formed part of the archival corpus, accessible to researchers. The existence of such documentation underscored that von Reibnitz's affiliation had been subject to official post-war assessment. This continuity between wartime enrollment and post-war review reinforced the reliability of the record. By the close of the 1990s, the narrative surrounding Princess Michael's father had settled into a documented and clarified form. The emphasis was no longer on discovery, but on precision. Archival verification, scholarly context, and careful reporting combined to define the historical outline. The matter remained part of her biography, yet it was framed within established evidence rather than conjecture. This stabilization marked a mature phase in the public understanding of her family history, grounded in documentation and contextual scholarship rather than in sensational disclosure. After 1990, the reunification of Germany and the consolidation of federal archival systems significantly expanded scholarly access to documentation from the National Socialist period. Records previously dispersed between West and East German repositories were reorganized, cataloged, and in many cases digitized. This administrative restructuring strengthened the evidentiary framework surrounding Nazi Party and SS membership files. Researchers no longer relied solely on fragmented holdings. Instead, they worked within centralized systems that allowed cross-referencing of personnel data, denazification files, and wartime administrative records. Within this expanded archival environment, previously confirmed cases such as that of Baron Günther von Reibnitz were re-examined in light of broader institutional data sets. Historians studying elite participation in National Socialist structures used membership lists to identify patterns of social background, education, and professional trajectory. Aristocratic affiliation remained one variable among many. Statistical analysis demonstrated that members came from a wide range of occupational categories. Noble lineage neither guaranteed high rank nor exempted individuals from participation. This contextual research reinforced earlier conclusions without altering the documented facts of von Reibnitz's enrollment. Academic publications during the 1990s emphasized methodological rigor. Scholars cited archival signatures, file numbers, and administrative codes when referencing SS membership. This precision reflected a broader shift in historiography toward documentary transparency. For public figures connected to documented affiliates, the effect was to stabilize biographical references. Princess Michael's father's membership remained verifiable within a structured archival framework. The availability of file confirmation limited speculative reinterpretation. During this period, public memory debates in Germany also intensified. Museums, memorial institutions, and educational programs expanded efforts to document the mechanisms of the Third Reich. Archival research informed exhibitions and scholarly conferences. The institutionalization of historical memory created a stable, interpretive environment in which individual cases were assessed against systemic analysis. Von Reibnitz's documented affiliation remained part of this wider historical landscape, rather than an isolated episode. In the United Kingdom, media coverage of Princess Michael of Kent continued to reference the established record when profiling her background. However, the tone had shifted from investigative exposure to routine acknowledgement. No new archival findings emerged to revise the factual outline. The integration of digital cataloging into German archives further ensured that membership records were preserved in accessible form. The permanence of documentation reduced the likelihood of future dispute over enrollment status. Princess Michael's own activities during the 1990s and early 2000 period focused on writing, lecturing, and patronage. Her interest in genealogy and European dynasties placed her within scholarly discussions of aristocratic history. The existence of confirmed archival material regarding her father did not prevent her participation in these fields, though it remained part of contextual background. The distinction between her professional pursuits and her inherited family history remained clear. By the early 21st century, the narrative surrounding her father's affiliation had become integrated into both academic and public reference works. The episode demonstrated how archival preservation, institutional reform, and scholarly methodology can converge to produce durable historical clarity. The expansion of archival access after 1990 did not generate new revelations in her case. Instead, it reinforced the stability of previously verified documentation and situated it within a comprehensive historical framework. As historical research matured in the early 21st century, public discussion increasingly centered on the distinction between documented affiliation and individual accountability. Princess Michael of Kent had been born in January 1945 at a point when Germany's military defeat was imminent and the administrative structure of the Third Reich was beginning to collapse. Her father's enrollment in the Nazi Party and the SS had occurred years earlier, during the 1930 period. The chronological separation was clear and consistently acknowledged in reporting. This distinction framed subsequent analysis of her biography. Legal responsibility for crimes committed under National Socialist governance was addressed through post-war tribunals and later prosecutions targeting individuals directly implicated in specific acts. Such proceedings required evidence of personal participation in prosecutable offenses. In the case of Baron Günther von Reibnitz, public reporting following the 1985 disclosure focused on documented membership rather than on allegations of individual criminal conduct. No legal action was initiated in connection with Princess Michael, as the issue concerned inherited background rather than personal involvement. This legal boundary shaped institutional response in the United Kingdom. The British monarchy operates within a constitutional framework that distinguishes between personal family history and official duty. Princess Michael did not hold executive governmental authority, nor did her father's wartime affiliation create a statutory conflict under British law. The absence of legal implications contributed to the measured approach adopted by Buckingham Palace. The matter remained one of historical record, rather than constitutional crisis. During the early 2000 period, public discourse in Britain reflected a broader societal emphasis on documentary accountability balanced by generational clarity. Media commentary often reiterated the timeline: her father's documented affiliation during the 1930 period, her birth in 1945, and the archival disclosure in 1985. This repetition reinforced chronological separation. It also underscored the principle that administrative records preserve fact, but responsibility attaches to actions rather than to lineage. The development of digital media during the early 21st century further altered the circulation of historical information. Online databases and digitized archives allowed researchers and journalists to verify details independently. References to von Reibnitz's membership became accessible through searchable repositories. The transparency of archival systems reduced ambiguity. Information that had once required formal archival request could now be confirmed through structured digital catalogs. This technological shift strengthened documentary stability. Princess Michael's public role during this period remained focused on cultural and charitable engagement. She continued to publish works on European royal history and to participate in selected public events. Biographical references and press coverage typically included acknowledgement of her father's documented affiliation, presented as established fact rather than as emerging controversy. The integration of this detail into routine profiles reflected the normalization of the historical record. By the mid-2000 period, the episode had become an example frequently cited in discussions of generational responsibility and archival transparency. It illustrated how preserved documentation can intersect with contemporary public life without generating legal consequence. The distinction between affiliation and accountability remained central. The narrative no longer revolved around discovery or clarification, but around interpretation within established legal and historical frameworks. This phase marked the consolidation of the issue as a defined component of Princess Michael's biographical history rather than as an active controversy. During the late 2000 period and into the 2010s, Princess Michael of Kent continued to media attention for reasons unrelated to her father's wartime record. Public commentary often centered on remarks she made in interviews, questions of protocol, or issues connected to royal finances and residence arrangements. In these instances, journalists frequently revisited established biographical details, including the confirmed documentation of Baron Günther von Reibnitz's Nazi Party and SS membership. The repetition did not introduce new archival findings. It reflected a pattern in which previously verified history became a standard contextual reference. The expansion of digital news platforms during the 2010s increased the speed and reach of such references. Online articles commonly included background paragraphs summarizing known facts about public figures. In Princess Michael's case, in WWII, summaries often mentioned her Central European aristocratic origins, her marriage to Prince Michael of Kent in 1978, and the 1985 disclosure concerning her father's affiliation. The format of digital reporting encouraged concise historical context. This practice reinforced the permanence of the archival record in public memory. At the same time, public understanding of the Second World War continued to evolve through educational initiatives, documentaries, and commemorative events marking significant anniversaries. The approach to Nazi-era history emphasized documentation and institutional responsibility. In this environment, confirmed SS membership carried clear historical meaning. However, reporting consistently distinguished between her father's documented affiliation during the 1930 period and her own life, which began in January 1945. The chronological boundary remained central to responsible coverage. Princess Michael maintained involvement in cultural patronage and historical writing throughout these years. Her published works addressed European royal families and dynastic connections. Engagement with aristocratic history occasionally prompted renewed attention to her personal background. Nevertheless, no new federal archival material emerged that altered the established facts of her father's enrollment. The narrative remained grounded in documentation confirmed decades earlier. Institutionally, there was no change in her status within the royal family. Prince and Princess Michael of Kent continued to carry out limited official functions while also pursuing private activities. The monarchy's constitutional structure did not link her father's historical affiliation to present governance. The issue remained historical rather than administrative. This continuity underscored the legal separation between documented ancestry and official duty. Academic discourse during the 2010s further integrated cases like von Reibnitz's into broader analyses of elite participation in National Socialist institutions. Comparative studies reference documented aristocratic memberships as part of structural examination. Such scholarship reduced the likelihood of renewed sensational framing. Instead, individual cases were incorporated into aggregate research addressing social composition and institutional behavior during the 1930 period. By the end of the 2010s, the reference to Baron von Reibnitz's SS membership had become a fixed element in Princess Michael's public biography. It appeared in encyclopedic entries, journalistic profiles, and historical discussions. The persistence of the detail demonstrated the durability of archival documentation in shaping long-term reputation. While later controversies brought her name back into headlines for unrelated reasons, the established historical record remained constant, neither expanded nor revised. By the early 2020s, the archival systems that preserved documentation from the National Socialist period had undergone further digitization and integration into searchable databases. The German Federal Archives expanded online access tools, allowing researchers to identify file references and confirm membership data with greater efficiency. While original documents often still required formal request procedures for full review, catalog information became more widely accessible. This development reinforced the permanence of records, such as those documenting Baron Günther von Reibnitz's enrollment in the Nazi Party and the SS. Digitization altered not the substance of the record, but the speed with which it could be verified. Information that had once required correspondence with archival staff in the 1980s could now be located through structured digital indexes. This technological change reduced ambiguity surrounding documented affiliations. For Princess Michael of Kent, it meant that references to her father's wartime membership were grounded in easily confirmable archival systems rather than in secondary reporting alone. The evidentiary foundation became more transparent. The broader academic community also benefited from digital cataloging. Scholars studying the administrative structure of the Third Reich increasingly relied on aggregated datasets derived from personnel rosters. These datasets allowed comparative analysis across regions and professions. Aristocratic affiliation remained one identifiable variable among many. Von Reibnitz's membership fit within patterns documented in earlier research, and digital consolidation confirmed rather than revised those findings. The institutional record remained stable. Public discourse during the 2020s often emphasized accountability in historical narratives. Digital platforms facilitated rapid dissemination of archival references, and social media discussions frequently linked to primary sources. In this environment, biographical summaries of public figures were often accompanied by hyperlinks to documented evidence. Princess Michael's background, including the 1985 disclosure of her father's SS membership, was therefore part of a digital information ecosystem. The shift did not generate new revelations, but it ensured sustained visibility of established facts. Despite increased digital transparency, the legal and constitutional framework surrounding her position remained unchanged. Princess Michael did not hold executive authority within government, and her father's documented affiliation carried no statutory implication for her public role. The distinction between historical documentation and contemporary responsibility remained central to institutional practice. This boundary continued to guide official response. Princess Michael maintained involvement in charitable and cultural activities during this period. Her published works and public appearances reflected ongoing engagement with European history and heritage. Media references to her father's affiliation appeared in context but did not dominate coverage. The historical record had become integrated into routine biography, neither obscured nor sensationalized beyond documented scope. The digital era thus solidified the archival foundation of the narrative. Preservation, cataloging, and online accessibility combined to ensure that the facts established in 1985 remained verifiable decades later. The episode demonstrated how administrative records created during wartime governance can persist across generations through institutional continuity and technological adaptation. By the early 2020s, the matter stood as a defined historical fact within Princess Michael's biography, sustained by documentary permanence rather than by ongoing investigative discovery. As the 2020s progressed, the discussion surrounding Princess Michael of Kent and her father's documented SS membership increasingly reflected broader patterns in public memory. The Second World War remained a central reference point in European historical consciousness, and archival evidence concerning affiliation with National Socialist institutions retained symbolic significance. However, the manner in which such information was presented evolved over time. The emphasis shifted from exposure to contextualization, from headline revelation to structured historical reference. Educational institutions and memorial organizations across Europe continued to develop programs addressing the mechanisms of the Third Reich. Research into party and SS membership emphasized institutional scale and administrative function. Within this framework, individual cases were incorporated into systemic analysis rather than treated as isolated events. Baron Günther von Reibnitz's confirmed enrollment appeared in scholarly databases and archival registers as part of aggregated documentation. The stability of these records reinforced the continuity of historical understanding. Public commentary in the United Kingdom reflected this institutional approach. Biographical entries in reference works and media profiles of Princess Michael consistently included mention of her father's affiliation, presented as a documented historical fact. The tone was factual rather than investigative. This normalization illustrated how archival evidence, once confirmed, becomes integrated into standard narrative structures. There were no new disclosures altering the record. The information persisted through repetition grounded in documentation. The generational distinction remained central to responsible reporting. Princess Michael's birth in January 1945 continued to be in relation to her father's earlier party and SS enrollment during the 1930 period. Chronology provided clarity. Legal responsibility under post-war frameworks applied to those directly involved in criminal acts. No proceedings were ever initiated in connection with her. The established separation between affiliation and inheritance remained intact. Digital media further embedded these distinctions within public understanding. Online encyclopedic entries, academic databases, and historical archives maintained cross-reference documentation. The transparency of sources reduced the potential for distortion. Readers and researchers could verify membership data through official channels rather than relying solely on secondary accounts. This accessibility strengthened the durability of the record. Princess Michael's own public presence during this period remained limited compared to senior members of the royal family. She continued occasional appearances and maintained interest in historical subjects. References to her father's wartime record appeared in context, but did not redefine her role. The narrative surrounding her life had stabilized within a framework of documented ancestry and constitutional separation. The enduring significance of the episode lies in its demonstration of archival continuity. Administrative records created during the governance of the Third Reich survived military defeat, occupation, denazification, reunification, and digitization. Those records intersected with the life of a public figure decades later, shaping aspects of her biography without altering her legal standing. The passage of time did not erase the documentation. Instead, it reinforced the principle that historical records, once preserved, continue to inform public memory across generations. By the mid-2020s, the historical narrative surrounding Princess Michael of Kent and her father's documented SS membership had reached a point of institutional stability. No new archival discoveries altered the factual outline established in 1985 and subsequently clarified in the decades that followed. The German Federal Archives continued to preserve the original personnel files, and digital cataloging ensured ongoing accessibility. The documentary framework remained intact, supported by administrative continuity rather than by renewed investigation. Within the British constitutional system, there was no mechanism by which ancestral affiliation alone could affect royal status absent legal violation. Princess Michael's position derived from her marriage in 1978 to Prince Michael of Kent. Her title and style were determined by established royal convention and letters patent governing the use of princely designations. Her father's documented enrollment in National Socialist institutions, while historically significant, did not intersect with British statutory law governing succession or public office. This legal separation contributed to the absence of formal institutional action. Media treatment during this period reflected a mature understanding of the issue. When Princess Michael appeared in coverage related to royal events or personal commentary, references to her father's wartime affiliation were typically included as brief, contextual notes. These references cited the 1985 archival disclosure and subsequent verification. The repetition followed a consistent factual template. There was no expansion beyond confirmed documentation, and no revision of established details. The narrative had become standardized. Academic scholarship on the Third Reich continued to examine the social composition of party and SS membership. Large-scale data analysis, enabled by digitized rosters, allowed researchers to map geographic origin, professional background, and age distribution of members. Aristocratic affiliation remained one factor among many. Von Reibnitz's enrollment remained part of this documented dataset. Scholarly interpretation emphasized structural analysis over individualized sensationalism. His case contributed to broader understanding without occupying a singular position in research. Public discourse in the 2020s also reflected increased awareness of archival permanence. The digital environment preserved references indefinitely, allowing biographical information to remain accessible across platforms. Historical affiliation once disclosed could not recede into obscurity. Instead, it became embedded within searchable knowledge systems. For Princess Michael, this meant that the confirmed record of her father's membership remained part of her documented biography, regardless of shifting news cycles. Throughout this period, she continued limited public engagement consistent with her established role. No official reevaluation of her position occurred. The distinction between personal history and inherited background remained central to both media and institutional treatment. The absence of new evidence reinforced the stability of the narrative. The long-term trajectory of this episode illustrates how archival documentation shapes biography over time. Initial disclosure in 1985 introduced verified evidence into public awareness. Subsequent decades of clarification, contextualization, and digitization solidified that evidence within both academic and media frameworks. By the mid-2020s, the matter stood as a defined historical reference point rather than as an evolving controversy. The continuity of records ensured that the past remained documented, while legal and constitutional boundaries defined the limits of its contemporary impact. By the later 2020s, the confirmed SS membership of Baron Günther Hubertus von Reibnitz had become a fixed element within the documented biography of Princess Michael of Kent. The essential facts had remained unchanged since their public disclosure in 1985 and subsequent archival verification. German federal records continued to list his enrollment in the Nazi Party and the Schutzstaffel during the 1930 period. denazification files created after 1945 remained preserved within official repositories. The continuity of documentation ensured that the evidentiary foundation of the narrative did not depend on interpretation or secondary reporting. Over time, the episode came to illustrate a broader principle concerning the durability of administrative records. Membership systems created for internal governance during the Third Reich produced paper trails that survived regime collapse, Allied occupation, federal consolidation, and digital transformation. These records, once cataloged and verified, acquired long-term historical authority. In Princess Michael's case, the intersection between preserved documentation and public identity demonstrated how archival material can shape biography decades after the original events. Public understanding of the matter matured through repetition and contextualization. Early coverage in 1985 emphasized revelation. Subsequent reporting focused on clarification and generational distinction. By the 2020s, references to her father's affiliation appeared as standardized biographical notes. The narrative no longer revolved around discovery, but around continuity of fact. Media accounts consistently acknowledged her birth in January 1945 and the absence of personal involvement in wartime activity. The chronological boundary remained central. Academic scholarship further integrated the case into structural studies of elite participation in National Socialist institutions. Researchers analyzing SS membership rosters included aristocratic affiliations within broader demographic surveys. Von Reibnitz's documented enrollment contributed data to those analyses without altering established interpretation. His case was neither unique nor exceptional within the statistical composition of the organization. It fit within patterns identified by historians examining the social background of members during the 1930 period. Within the British constitutional framework, Princess Michael's status continued to derive from her marriage in 1978. No statutory change or institutional reconsideration emerged as a result of the historical record. The distinction between personal accountability and inherited association remained clear. The monarchy's approach to extended family members did not incorporate ancestral political affiliation as a determinant of title or role. This boundary defined the limits of contemporary impact. The long arc of the story therefore rests on documentation rather than controversy. A wartime membership recorded in administrative files persisted across generations. Archival preservation allowed journalists to uncover and verify the record decades later. Scholarly research contextualized the affiliation within broader historical structures. Public discourse adapted from exposure to normalization. The episode illustrates how preserved evidence can intersect with modern biography while remaining confined to historical fact. In the end, the significance of the case lies in its clarity. The documentation exists, the chronology is established, and the institutional consequences are defined. Princess Michael of Kent's life continues within the framework of constitutional monarchy and public service, while the historical record of her father's affiliation remains part of the documented past. Princess Michael of Kent's biography demonstrates how historical records can reframe personal narratives long after events have concluded. The revelation of her father's SS membership in the mid-1980s did not alter her constitutional position, but it permanently connected her public identity to documented structures of the Nazi state. Archival verification, denazification files, and subsequent scholarship established a factual foundation that remains unchanged. Her life illustrates how aristocratic families were embedded within the political systems of their time. The historical importance of this case rests not in speculation, but in preserved documentation and its continuing presence in the public record.